Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing our Jiang Wei's Northern Expedition Let's Talk Lore series with episode 4 titled Xiahou Defection. Before we get started, here's the answer to our trivia question from the end of our last episode, and be sure to stay tuned until the end of this episode for a brand new trivia question. Now last time we covered Jiang Wei's third Northern Expedition, where the Shuhan side scored a minor victory, thanks in a large part to a string of nomadic rebellions in the Liang and Yong provinces, as relationships between the Qiang tribes and the Kingdom of Wei reached an all-time low after Cao Shuang's failed offensive campaign in the year 244. In hindsight, had Jiang Wei been given more resources by the Shuhan court under Fei Yi, perhaps more could have been gained in this northern expedition, given the sheer scale of the nomadic rebellions that spread across the 5 commanderies on the Wei side, especially given how the Wei court was perhaps also at its most vulnerable and weakest state, with Cao Shuang in full control, after marginalizing his co-regent, Sima Yi, to the point where Sima Yi would be forced to fake an illness just to stay alive. But at the same time, it's impossible for the Shuhan court to foresee this development within the Wei court politics, and with veteran General Guo Huai still alive and defending the Wei Western Front, investing more resources into Jiang Wei's northern expeditions just did not seem wise. And honestly, what no one could have foreseen is the Gulpingling incident in the year 249, as the previously mentioned marginalized co-regent, Sima Yi, would stage the most unlikely coup against Cao Shuang. Now, as we have covered this coup in great details in a separate Let's Talk Lore series, we'll jump ahead to how this coup will impact Jiang Wei's next northern expedition, as in the political purge following Cao Shuang's execution, Sima Yi's eyes turned west towards Generals Xiahou and Xiahou, who were both appointed to the Western Front by Cao Shuang. In particular, Xiahou was Cao Shuang's younger cousin and related by blood, and thus given this shift in political power, it comes as no surprise that not long after Cao Shuang's death, Sima Yi would find reasons to issue summons for both Xiahou and Xiahou, as Sima Yi wanted them back in the capital, under his watchful eyes, rather than having them as potential future liabilities out on the frontiers with armies under their command. Yet when these summons reached Xiahou and Xiahou out on the Western Front, both were hesitant to return to the capital, as they both had no disillusions about Sima Yi's mercy, especially after Cao Shuang's execution. Knowing that returning to the capital would most likely mean a certain death, Xiahou decided that the only chance of survival for them would be to take their troops and defect to the rival kingdom of Shuhan. Xiahou, on the other hand, did not want to betray his country just for his own survival's sake, as he would turn down his uncle Xiahou's offer to defect together, and decided to take his chances back in the capital, hoping that his ties with the Sima clan, through his now deceased sister's marriage to Sima Shi, would help keep him alive. Seeing that Xiahou had made up his mind, Xiahou didn't wait around to try to convince his stubborn nephew, as Xiahou was stationed farther west under the supervision of Guo Huai. So in early 249, Xiahou took his chances and led his troops on march for the Yinping commandery inside the kingdom of Shuhan. Now this was a momentous decision for Xiahou, as Xiahou had long harbored a personal grudge against the kingdom of Shuhan, due to the death of his own father, Xiahou at the Battle of Mount Dingjun. But now 30 years later, and in his 60s, Xiahou was more concerned about self-preservation than a 3-decade-old grudge. Now, had things all gone according to plan, Xiahou's defection should have concluded matters out west, but things started to get complicated when Xiahou and his army got lost in the mountains, as they could not find their way to the Shuhan side. Worried about accidentally returning to the Wei side, Xiahou decided to encamp his army in the mountains and send out scouts in hopes of contacting the Shuhan forces, as he needed them to come rescue them. And this is what would set off Jiang Wei's fourth northern expedition, as once the Shuhan side found out about Xiahou's defection, Jiang Wei was immediately given the green light to launch his next northern expedition, as his first task would be to find Xiahou's lost army and bring them back to Shuhan, as despite Xiahou's advanced age, he would instantly become the highest ranking Wei officer and one with close ties to the Cao clan to defect. It also helps that Xiahou was the older cousin of Lady Xiahou, who was the wife to Zhang Fei and the mother-in-law to Emperor Liu Shan's empresses, which made Xiahou Ba actually a distant uncle-in-law to Emperor Liu Shan. Additionally, Xiahou Ba would bring Shu Han first-hand knowledge of Sima Yi's coup and the upheaval inside the Wei court following the purge of Cao Shuang and all his associates. But this information would also end up misguiding the Shu Han side and Jiang Wei, as they would overreach during this fourth northern expedition after rescuing Xiahou Ba's forces right before they almost ran out of food. Jiang Wei would end up sending two of his lieutenants in Juan and Li Shao to advance to Xiahou Ba's previous garrison location near Mount Qu to construct two fortifications, thinking that the Wei forces would be lacking in this area after Xiahou Ba's defection. While these fortifications were being constructed, Jiang Wei's main force would advance farther north in an attempt to make contact with a few Tang tribes that were previously friendly with Xiahou Ba, hoping to convince them to also defect and rebel against Wei. However, Jiang Wei's assumptions here were soon proven false, as Sima Yi, who had previously served a long time as the commander of the Wei Western forces, had already made every necessary step in anticipation of a potential defection from both Xiahou Ba and Xiahou Xuan. First, veteran General Guo Huai was reappointed to take over for Xiahou Ba, and thus Xiahou Ba's previous frontier garrison position at Mount Qu was not in fact undefended, as Jiang Wei's lieutenants would soon find out. Second, in place of Guo Huai, official Chen Tai, the son of Sima Yi's previous co-regent during Cao Rui's reign and longtime ally Chen Qun, would be assigned as the new prefect of the Yong province. Furthermore, all the way back in 243, Sima Yi had managed to appoint one of his proteges in Deng Ai out west as the new administrator of the frontier Nan'an commandery. Thus, when Jiang Wei's lieutenants made their fortifications at Mount Qu, the new boss out west in Chen Tai immediately formulated a two-step plan with Guo Huai. First, Chen Tai would take his officer in Xu Zhi and the local administrator of Nan'an in Deng Ai to Mount Qu, where they would form a blockade of the two new Shu Han forts with the goal of cutting off their water and food supplies and forcing Jiang Wei to return with his main army to aid his lieutenants. Then once Jiang Wei arrives back at Mount Qu, Guo Huai would then take the main western garrison forces and attempt a flank to cut off Jiang Wei's retreat to eliminate the Shu Han threat once and for all. And this was indeed what happened, as Jiang Wei's two lieutenants in Juan and Li Shao soon became surrounded by an overwhelming amount of troops from Chen Tai and Deng Ai's armies, which refused to fight them as their only goal was to cut off their supply lines. And this development immediately forced Jiang Wei to return in an attempt to rescue his lieutenants, only to find Guo Huai's position to envelop him as well. Not wanting to risk the complete annihilation of his army, Jiang Wei decided at the last moment to abandon his two lieutenants, as the fourth northern expedition would end here with Jiang Wei pulling back to Shu Han, with most of his army intact, while his two lieutenants in Juan and Li Shao would both end up deciding to surrender to the Wei forces after seeing their commander abandon them. It was an unfortunate loss that stemmed largely from miscalculation of Wei readiness after Sima Yi's coup and Xiahou Ba's subsequent defection. But all things considered, the Shu Han side still considered the entire operation a success, as Jiang Wei was able to bring back Xiahou Ba and his army, and the defection of the Wei general of the right in Xiahou Ba far outweighed the loss of two minor lieutenants. Now, aside from these immediate results, the surprising readiness of the Wei side and the new appointments of Chen Tai and Deng Ai in the Yong province did force Jiang Wei to reconsider his strategy, as by the next year in 250, Jiang Wei would launch his fifth northern expedition using a new path shown to him by the two Hu chieftains in Baihu Wen and Zhiwu Dai, who had used this western path beyond both Wei and Shu Han's borders, high up in what would eventually be known today as the edge of the Qinghai Tibetan Plateau, as Jiang Wei's army would surprise the Wei side in 250 with a surprise attack all the way in the north against the Siping commandery. But as this was Jiang Wei's first attempt at using this path, there were still many small details such as supply lines that needed to be worked out, as after a few small raids, Jiang Wei bumped into some fortified Wei positions and simply decided to retreat. Now, Jiang Wei will take the information learned from this small probing attack with him and formulate a grander plan for this route in the future. But for the time being, this short 5th Northern Expedition would end with only a few small returns in the form of some captured Wei officers. And amongst them would be a man named Guo Xiu, who, as we have discussed previously in our Prime Ministers of Shuhan Let's Talk Lore series, would go on to become the Shuhan General of the Left in just 2 short years, before using his elevated position to assassinate and kill the Shuhan leader and Jiang Wei's boss, Fei Yi, in a New Year's feast in the year 253. While this would be a tragedy for Shuhan and eventually herald in the decline of the Shuhan imperial court, as less capable men would assume control, it did finally unleash Jiang Wei, as without the likes of Jiang Wan and Fei Yi to limit his troop counts, Jiang Wei finally can plan and execute bigger and more ambitious northern expeditions in the future. So as we end our episode here, come back next time to see what Jiang Wei can do with his new northern attack route, especially as he gets more troops and supplies after Fei's death. And hopefully you all have enjoyed this episode enough to consider subscribing to the channel for more content on Three Kingdoms history, or support the channel by leaving a comment below, or simply hit that like button, as our next episode in the series will drop once this episode reaches 300 likes. And until then, bye!